Welcome to Daily Plunge. We are in Paul's second letter to the Corinthians, chapter 12, verses 1 through 10. Paul says, I guess I need to continue boasting, even though there's no point to it. Let me tell you about my visions and revelations. Now, we need to remember that in the Bible, in both Old and New Testament, visions were a common occurrence as a way for God to communicate with his people. In fact, when Peter speaks to the crowd in Acts chapter 2, he cites Joel chapter 2 that says that when the Spirit comes, he will give dreams to the old men and women. He'll give visions to the young men and women. And so Paul says, I have a vision. Not only that, I was taken up. Those guys over there, they have visions, but even better than that, I was caught up. I ascended into heaven. I was in the third realm of the heaven. I was in paradise, which in that day would have referenced a garden in the palace of the king. So he's saying, I was hanging out with the royal household, with the family of God. And he says all this, but he says it's to no point. And if we have an ecstatic experience with God, and some of us do, what's the point of it if we only use it for ourselves? The whole point of this is to be closer to God, to hear God's voice, and to be directed in ministry. And so Paul goes on to say that while he has this encounter with God, which means that he has an extraordinary relationship with the Lord, he doesn't claim any status from it. In fact, he says, I don't even want to boast about that. I know some guy, he's sort of a joke, I know a guy, he went up to third heaven. But then he says, I can tell you about all kinds of things, but that's not really what I boast about. In verse 7, he says, just so, even if I should choose to boast, I would not be a fool, because I would be speaking the truth. But I don't want to boast because I want to talk about what really matters. And he says in verse 7, in order to keep me from being proud or arrogant, Satan gave me a benefit. Satan gave me a messenger, and it was a thorn in my life, a thorn in my flesh. Now, we don't know what it is, and there's all kinds of speculations about it. But what Paul says is that this kept him from being proud and arrogant. And more than that, he said 3 times, I pleaded with the Lord Jesus, my healer, to take it away from me. But Jesus spoke to me and said, my grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in your weakness. And Paul says, that's what I'm going to boast about. I mean, this is so foolish. Why would you boast about weakness? Paul says, because I'm not boasting about myself. It doesn't do me any good, doesn't do you any good. I want to boast about what God can do in your broken and weak life. And he says, I'm going to boast all the more about my weakness so we can talk about how Christ's power rests on me and how Christ's power can rest on you. And then he gives this verse 10 really tells us how, if you want that power, how do you find access to it? He says, to delight in weakness, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties, because when you're weak, that's when you'll be strong through the power of God. The challenge for you and me is, are you looking for those opportunities for God's power to shine through your weakness? Are you looking to find God in your weakness? Have a blessed day.